you can begin. And like Tybalt was saying beforehand, it's summer, people, even, really great sessions, we're seeing, that we're seeing less people, but also gives us an opportunity to have more intimate conversation. And I think it's a nice opportunity to have those kinds of sessions as well. So today, this is the third of the 4 sessions I'm doing. It's called People of the Book, about for in honor of Israel's book month or book week. And this session is basically about popular books in Israel and popular Israeli books in the US. And Jill is here. Jill is B'nai's librarian, and as such is also talking about the books that are at B'nai, and helping with the popular books that are in the library, what people are reading more, and giving us an insight about that as well. And then I will be talking about afterwards about this subject of what are the popular books in Israel and the popular books that I have seen that are in the US as well, using what information that Jill is saying as well. And that will be our session for today. And that's it. So Jill, you feel free to take the lead in the meantime, and I will follow you afterwards.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Glad you could make it to our session. I had 3 handouts that Netta is actually going to have to give you after the fact. One of the handouts is a list of as many authors that were Israelis that were translated to English as I could find. So it's quite a big list. I've given you a little bit about their background, very little, and I've included as to whether they're male or female on that list and whether or not we have their books in our library. So that's one of the handouts. Another handout, which is a very important one, I've been trying to teach people to do this for years, is it's a screenshot of our online catalog, and it explains how to use our online catalog. You can use it from anywhere in the world very simply. So that's explained. And then the third one is just a list of the books of the featured authors that I'm going to discuss tonight, the ones that we have in our B'nai Israel library. Right now the library is closed, but as it starts to reopen, or even probably a little before that, people can always text me and I can figure out a way to get books to you, whether I leave them in my mailbox, and after the synagogue opens, I can leave them with the guards. So having said that, I'm going to have Netta put me back into a screen share. Let's see, and there we go. All right. So let me see if I can.
Before you begin, Jill, I have everyone's email, except I don't know what your last name is, Shelley, and I don't know Avram's email as well, but I gave him mine, so I will just email him afterwards. But Shelley, if you could write your email either to me privately or in the chat, then I would be able to send you these handouts afterwards, because everyone else I have your email.
I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay, so the first author I'm going to talk, oh my goodness, it already went to the second slide.
No.
Start that
There you
again. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Shemuel. Again, I'm going to butcher these names, Netta, so please excuse me. Shemuel Yosef Egnan, who was born in Galatia in 1888 and later immigrated to Mandatory Palestine. In Hebrew, he's known as Shai Egnan, and in English, he's published under S.Y. Egnan. He's one of the figures of modern Hebrew fiction. He grew up in a religious home and he was schooled by his parents. But in addition to studying Jewish texts, he was also tutored in German, and he studied the writings of Hashkalah, which had a great influence on him. So I had to look up what Hashkalah was. So I'm just going to read to you what I found. The Hashkalah, or Jewish Enlightenment, was an intellectual movement among the Jews of Central and Eastern Europe beginning in the 1770s and ending around 1881. It sought to preserve the Jews as a separate, unique collective and worked for a cultural and moral renewal, especially a revival of Hebrew for secular purposes, pioneering the modern press and literature and the language, and it strove to integrate these Jews into surrounding societies. Now, with that as its backdrop, trying to integrate Hebrew into literature, I want you to think about that. So at the age of 8, he started writing both poems in both Hebrew and in Yiddish, and by 15, he published his first poem in Yiddish. In 1913, he moved to Germany, where he married and had a child, and he continued to write there. In fact, he collaborated with Martin Buber on the anthology of Hasidic stories. In 1924, however, a fire destroyed his library and his rare collection of books, and shortly thereafter, he moved to back to, mandated Palestine. And then in 1929, with the anti-Jewish riots, his library was again destroyed. And these things were very traumatic for him, and it's reflected in some of his works. So it's not surprising that he attempts to recapture the lives and the traditions of former times and the fading tradition of the European shtetl, and dealing with conflicts, traditional Jewish life, language, and modern Jewish life and language. He was once quoted as a man of unquestionable genius and one of the greatest storytellers of our time. Oh, someone needs to mute. His unique linguistic style mixed modern and rabbinic Hebrew contributed to the renewal of the Hebrew language as we see it today, and has influenced many, many writers, many generations of writers. And let me go to the next picture. And here you can see him receiving the Nobel Prize for Literature, which he shared with Nellie Sachs, who I don't have any information about, in 1966.
She was a Jewish
poet, I know.
Poet, yes.
Yeah. But that's all the information I have on her. But if you see in the left-hand corner, there's King Gustav VI of Sweden applauding him. Thought that was kind of cool. So wanted you to have that. Okay, and the next person I'd like to talk about is S.Y. Oh, I'm sorry, did I just, oh my goodness. I'm really out of sync here. Hang on. I put two of the first pages together. Is Yehuda Amichai, which I have to find here. Okay, I'll do it for you. So Yehuda Amichai was a renowned Jewish poet. He was born in 1924 as Ludwig Pfeiffer in Germany to an Orthodox Jewish family, and he was raised speaking both Hebrew and German. His family fled the country, Germany, right before, during the rise of Hitler, and he landed in occupied Palestine when he was 12. And again, I don't know whether to call it occupied Palestine, mandated Palestine, Israel, so excuse me for interchanging terms. To me, it's Israel, but I know that historically that wasn't what it was called.
Historically, it's probably mandated Palestine because it's under the British authority. So
okay,
yeah.
So I'll stick with that one. Okay, he served in the army, and he fought with the elite Palmach unit, which Netta went into some detail with in another class that I found very interesting, during the War of Independence in 1948. So he also served in World War II. After the war, he studied Bible and Hebrew literature at the Hebrew University, and he published his first book in poetry in 1955. And then he went ahead and fought in the Sinai War and the War of Yom Kippur in 1973. And the horror of these wars are really reflected in a lot of his poetry that comes after that. Over the next several decades, he taught in Hebrew University, as well as visiting professor at Berkeley, New York University, and Yale. He published several books of poetry, I think 13 or 14, I couldn't get the exact number, novels, short stories, children books, and plays, which were performed in the US, Germany, Poland, Italy, and Holland. And his books have been published in 40 languages, and they appear in high school curriculums and the syllabuses all over the world. And I know we've used him at B'nai for the Talmud Torah. In 1994, and that's, I think, my next slide here. Let's see. Oh, no, not yet. He was invited by Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin to read his poems at the ceremony of the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo. And he chose to read God Has Pity on the kindergarten children, which is interesting because now this poem is inscribed on the wall in the Rabin Museum in Tel Aviv. And there are streets in Israel named for him, and there's also one in Germany, in Würzburg, Germany. And he died in September of 2000. Okay, so let's go to my next author. Okay, and this one, let's see. I'm completely out of sync here. Here we go. So this should be, yes, okay. This is Avraham Bubli Yeshua, or as we know him as A.B. Yeshua. He was born in America. He was born in 1936 to a fifth-generation Sephardic Jewish family that had migrated to Israel around, I think, 32. And he began to publish fiction after his service in the Israeli army. And he became a prominent figure in what was called the New Wave generation of Israeli writers, who differed from their predecessors in discussing predecessors who focused more closely on the individual, where he focused more on the individual rather than the psychology of the group, which seemed to be preceding him. And then in 63 through 67, he lived in Paris, and he served as the general secretary of the World Union of Jewish Students. And why I find this interesting, because again, Jewish Book Week spread throughout the world, and I'm sure that he had a big influence in seeing that happen in Europe. So I felt that was interesting. And he started teaching comparative literature at the University of Haifa and became a full professor. He's been doing that since 1972. He's written a lot of novels, short stories, plays, poetry, essays. Essays. And he's described in the New Yorker as a kind of Israeli Faulkner. And he's been established as one of Israel's foremost authors and a novelist with a particular gift for capturing the mood of contemporary Israel. Yehoshua, you gotta help me out here, Netta.
Yoshua.
Yehoshua, right, is an Israel peace movement activist. And you'll notice I'm going to mention some of the politics of some of the other authors because it was really reflected in their writing. He freely
I'm happy that you're going to mention that, and I'm going to say just pay attention that the authors that Jill is mentioning and their political opinions. So that's good that you're mentioning that.
Right. Thank you. He freely airs his political views in essays and interviews and attended the signing of the Geneva Accord. He's both a long-standing critic of Israeli occupation and also of Palestinian political culture. But he has been criticized by the American community for a statement he made many years ago that full Jewish life could only be had in a Jewish state. Nevertheless, in 2005, he was voted out of 200, the 77th greatest Israel of all time in a poll that was taken by an Israeli newspaper. And I would try to pronounce it, but I'm going to need corrected. It's Yedot Abronot.
Yediot Achronot.
Thank you. What would I do without you? Okay, and then next we're going to move on to Amos Oz. So let's get to him. Okay, and this will represent him well, this shot. He was originally named Amos Klausner, and he was born in 1939 in Jerusalem. But at the age of 14, he became a labor Zionist. He left home, he joined a kibbutz, and he changed his name to Oz, Amos Oz, which means courage. Oz means courage. When he was asked why Jerusalem and not Tel Aviv, he replied that Tel Aviv was not radical enough for him. He first began to write on the kibbutz, and they allowed him one day a week off work to be able to write. He was sent by his kibbutz to Hebrew University, where he studied philosophy and Hebrew literature. He served in the Israeli army from 56 to 60, also in 67 and 73. But after the Six-Day War, he became very active in Israeli peace movements. And he was really working towards a two-state solution. He was opposed to Israeli settlement activities, and he was among the first to praise the Oslo Accord and talks with the PLO, and that's why I use this picture. He went on to become a full professor at the university, Ben-Gurion University, and he's described as a tribal storyteller, recording strengths and conflicts of his people, reflecting the splits and strains in Israeli culture. He writes in biblical language and Hebrew, and he draws heavily on ancient texts. But he also did a lot to evolve the language of Hebrew into its new contemporary forms. So remember, we talked about Amichai used the language. Now he's evolving the language into a more modern form. But what's really, I thought, an interesting little tidbit is that his parents were multilingual. His father claimed to have spoken 16 or 17 languages, and his mother claimed that she could speak 7 or 8 languages, but neither of them were comfortable speaking in Hebrew. So they spoke in Russian and Polish in their house, but they only allowed Amos to speak in Hebrew. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Okay, he's the author of over 40 books, novels, short story collections, children's books, and essays that have been translated into 45 languages, which is more than any other Israeli writer. His novels are immensely popular in the country, selling he's sold over 70,000 of his hardbacks alone in Israel. And I have my slides out of order, so bear with me for 1 second. So again, last week, if you had listened in, we talked about Israeli, well, this is Israeli Book Month. We talked about Jewish Book Month. We talked about, again, how it's spread all over the world. So this one takes place at an Israeli exhibit in the International Book Festival in Budapest in 2010. So it's not just Israeli, but it has an Israeli component, which I thought was really great. Okay, so let me go back to my last picture. And in this picture, he's the recipient of an honor, and he's getting it from Prince of Asturias, and it's a laureate award from, he's receiving it from Spain's Prince Felipe during a ceremony in 2007. So I wanted to do that. Unfortunately, Amos Oz died very recently in 2018 at the age of 79, having won almost every literary prize short of the Nobel Prize, and having become perhaps Israel's most foremost contemporary novelist, and also one of its most controversial novelists. Some Israelis regard him as a prophet, but others think he's little more than a traitor. Okay, so whoops, let me go back one. So my next one, and again, I'm out of sync over here, so let me, let's see. I am completely out of sync. Let me try to get back. Okay, so my next one is Meir Shalev, and he was born in 1948, and he grew up in Nahala, which is one of Israel's first moshavs. He was the son of a poet, Yitzhak Shalev. And he was drafted in 1966. He fought in the Six-Day War, and after the war, he was injured in friendly fire. He studied psychology at the University of Hebrew and produced and hosted several radio and television shows. He's currently he's a columnist with the daily Yadot Aronot.
Yediot Achronot.
Thank you. He's written nonfiction and children's books, as well as a lot of fiction. And he identifies with the Israeli left, believes the conflict with the Palestinians can be resolved by establishing a two-state solution. He's a best-selling author in Israel, Holland, Germany, has been translated into over 20 languages, and he was voted 42nd greatest Israeli of all time on that list of 200 that was done by a poll of the Israeli news website, Nyet. Why Nyet? Oh well. Y-N-E-T.
It's called Ynet. You're
it is
correct.
called Ynet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wasn't sure. Now he's also made his name on the American literary scene when he came out with Blue Mountain, which has now been in 1988. It's now been translated into English and is one of the top 5 best-selling books that were ever published in Israeli's history. His ability to create words inhabited by the richness of invention and obsessiveness of dreams delivers startling imagery and passionate original characters. And that was a quote from the New York Times. I thought that was very nice. And I have one more picture of him. And I just like this because he does a lot of speaking engagements throughout, the world and Israel. So I like that shot. Okay, we're almost done here. And our last author is David Grossman. And I have a little video to play of him. So wait, let me see if I can get this. Okay, I'm gonna try to make this work. So bear with me. Let's see. A second. Huh. Okay, I'm sorry. This might take a moment. My first time using a video.
Jill, I opened the video. What do you need?
Well, I want to start at 4.08 minutes.
How long is the video? Because it's already 7:50.
Yeah. Oh, okay. You know what? We can skip the video.
Okay.
Let's just skip it. Okay, and I'll just give a little quick review of him.
Okay, so
let me
here,
go back
just go back to sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, let me go back to screen share. Okay. So there's a nice shot of David Grossman. Oh, it wants to go to that one. Hang on. There we go. Okay, he was born in 1954 in Jerusalem, and his father, who started out in one profession, ended up as a librarian and encouraged David to read. So at 9, he won a national competition for his works on Shalom Aleichem, and he subsequently continued to work as a child actor for the national radio. He served in the military, studied philosophy at the theater of the University of Jerusalem, and he worked in radio for 25 years. However, in 1988, he was fired for refusing to bury the news that the Palestinian leadership had declared its own state and conceded Israel's right to exist. Grossman has continued to be an outspoken left-wing peace activist, along with his fellow authors Amos Oz and Avi Yehoshua. The death of his son in southern Lebanon prompted him to deal with the Israeli conflict in even greater detail. And following that, he wrote a book called To the End of the Land. And we have that in our library, just if you want to know. His books have been translated into more than 30 languages and have numerous prizes. In 1915, he withdrew his candidacy for the Israel Prize for Literature after Prime Minister Netanyahu tried to remove 2 of the judging panels who claimed to be anti-Zionist. And in 2017, let's see, that's what this is just a picture of it, but I was trying to run a video of it. He won the Man Booker Award International Prize, it's a very, very prestigious prize for A Horse Walks Into the Bar. Was the name, A Horse Walks Into a Bar. And again, that's a book that has been translated from Hebrew into English, and we also have that in our library. In 2018, the State of Israel's 70th anniversary, David Grossman was named as the winner of Israel's top civilian honor, the Israel Prize for Literature. So he did win something very prestigious on top of the Booker Award. And then I'm ending with a final quote that I found that I thought really sums him up. In novels, stories, essays, his documentary writing, and his prolific writing for children, he has produced a series of masterpieces that showcase a rich imagination, profound personal wisdom, and human sensitivity, together with a clear moral stance and a unique and rooted linguistical style. The translation of his books into dozens of languages have transformed him into one of the best known, most admired, and most loved Israeli authors in the world. For all these reasons, we have found David Grossman worthy of the Israeli Prize for Literature in the year 57-58. So that was the speech given. And I just want to add one more thing. I have a hunch that the reason he is so popular among Israeli authors is because he has a name that sounds American. And I think sometimes Americans are afraid to pick up an Israeli author, but not afraid to pick up a name they recognize. And with that, Netta, I'm sorry I went over. When I practiced, it didn't go so long. And I'm turning it back to you.
No problem. We just also started a little bit late, and there's also an opening, so totally fine. I'm now going to be sharing my screen with a little PowerPoint that I made as well. And I'm going to play off with what Jill was talking about, and I really appreciate highlighting those authors because I think it really is relevant to the known authors that we see in the US. And I'm going to be basically taking a step back and first talking about the more popular books we see in Israel, and then from that point going to and focusing on the US as well. So first and foremost, I want to kind of differentiate between classic Israeli books and what is popular today. And I think those are two different things, because we have books that have been written, over a long period of time. And when we say Shai Agnon, for example, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, a lot of people know his works. Or the Bible, I think, is the most popular book in Hebrew, for example, or the Talmud. Like, religious sources definitely beat any Israeli novel that currently exists. So I just want to put that aside. I'm focusing more on Israeli classic books and then the popular ones we see today. So I found, lots of lists about, classic Israeli books, and I just wanted to highlight two purposely, and I'll talk about them briefly and then explain why I'm highlighting them. So one of them was written in 1947. That's the one on the left, by Moshe Shamir. Which is called He Walked Through the Fields. Moshe Shamir was actually a member of Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, and he wrote this about somebody who grew up in a kibbutz, this ideal Israeli. So if you've heard any of my lessons or sessions beforehand, I talk about this ideal Jew who was the fighting Jew, the pioneer who was founding Israel, and they were on the kibbutz. So Moshe Shamir perfectly showed that Israeli in his book. And the story is about him and his lover, who was a Holocaust survivor, and the development of that. I won't give anything away by chance you want to get it. That's why I put the title in English purposely. But the interesting thing is that he decided to leave the kibbutz. So his book was actually hidden in the storehouse, and it was not published. Only later he wrote poems, or he wrote a play that was based on this book. And because it became so popular, the book was taken out of the storage and published. So originally it was written in 1947, so before prior to the founding of the state of Israel, but actually brought out later on, made into a film in the 1960s and a play as well. So it was really Israeli classic, but it's really hard to find it in English today, even though it is translated. And I don't know how many people know this title when I'm saying it. I think the names that Jill was saying are much more known to the people who are here and chose to be a lecturer about Israeli literature. The one on the right is by Eli Amir, and it's called Scapegoat, or in Hebrew, Tarnegol Kaparot. So Tarnegol Kaparot is literally the chicken that you do with Kaparot right before Yom Kippur, that more observant people would do this today, that they wave the chicken over the head and they slaughter it in the name that all your sins are going into the chicken. So that's what Tarnegol Kaparot actually means, but they translate it into scapegoat. And Eli Amir himself, he immigrated from Iraq with his family, and moved to Israel in 1950. And the story is somewhat semi-autobiographical about an Iraqi boy who moves to Israel and is trying to become a part of the kibbutz. Again, this ideal of the kibbutz comes across as well as in his book, but his book came out in the 1970s. And this talks about coming together, the Mizrahi Jews and the Ashkenazi Jews, and how they were able to try to become part of society, but also how that did not work, and their cultural differences, and that and those internal battles that they had to deal with as well. And it's actually a book that I read in high school. There was a play about it, and it's become so wide known that people nowadays read it as in high school. It's become obligatory to read it, and I was actually tested on it in high school. So so it's something that I know very well, and I think that my generation, knows it very well as well. But I don't know if this is something that this is not the first book you think about when you think of Israeli classic books. By the way, I know that Eli Amir, I did check this. He does appear in the B'nai Library. So if you're interested in reading any of his books about Iraqi Jews and they're moving to Israel, he writes a lot about that, and I would recommend checking that out as well. So this is what I'm talking about with classic, and I really wanted to just you to be aware that there are books that are classic Israeli that you probably have not heard of, and there are many more where that came from. And to actually emphasize that, I want to point out that in 2018, the amount of books that came out in Israel is 8,571 books. I do not think that there are 8,571 books that were translated from Hebrew to English in 2018. Out of those 8,571, 85% of those are Hebrew. And out of those that are translated, 63% are from English. There are 4% from German and 4% from French. And then there's 27% from all these other different languages. I can just say, for example, I worked in a bookstore, so there were always these thriller type books that were from Norwegian, and it was really known that the Scandinavian, they always had these really thriller books that were kind of horrible, but certain people really loved them. So they're translated from a lot of different languages, but it's not enough to be a whole percentage. Another interesting thing is that in the same year, they found out that on average, Israelis read about 5 books a year. So there is definitely people of the book who read quite a lot. And also, people prefer printed books rather than digital. Digital is not as common in Israel. The idea of a Kindle is not as common. People do have it, but as Amazon is not in Israel, it's less prevalent. You see that people really prefer that printed book. Another thing that's interesting is that religious people read more, hint, hint, Shabbat. So that often makes people read more. Also printed newspapers, which will never die among the religious community, whether they are, how observant they are. And books as well. They're not going to use a Kindle on Shabbat. So that causes a situation where they're actually reading printed books. Let me just make sure I didn't forget anything. Okay, I think that, that's exactly what I want to say. Perfect. Before I continue, I see that we, okay, great. So what are the popular books today in Israel, basically? So I took this information according to what we see in libraries from 2017 to 2018. And what we can see is that in libraries, the popular books that are being taken out of the libraries are Jojo Moyes books, which means that they are translated from English to Hebrew, which is really an interesting thing, that basically the fact that Hebrew was revived when Israel was founded created a situation that it's now a spoken language that people are speaking, and they want books from other languages to be translated into. So Jojo Moyes writes these very romantic type books, and basically what we see is that the books that are taken most out of the library are translated from English, interestingly enough. And I recommend you also to join the panel we have next week, because that point will come up again also next week. However, in bookstores, we can really see the variety of books that goes way beyond just novels. So this, for example, over here, this book is a novel. It's by Yochi Brandes, who basically is what I like to call biblical novels. She wrote the known book of the Secret Book of Kings, it's called. And this book is about Adele. It's about the daughter of the Baal Shem Tov, the person who founded the Hasidut movement in the 18th century. And that's the classic novel that we see today. We also have another popular book of Meir Shalev that came out in 2018 as well. So that's definitely among the bestsellers, and Joe mentioned him as well. I do want to point out that we have a lot more variety of books. Yuval Noah Harari is a historian, and his books are also really known in the US. We have this biography of Netanyahu, which was written by Ben Caspit, who's a known journalist, that came out in 2018 and was in the bestsellers Israeli list. And we also have this book, which is called Chaim Sheli, and it's basically a parenting book written by somebody who's a parenting coach. And that was the best-selling book of 2018 in both bookstores that are the biggest chains in Israel, Steinmetzky and Somet Sfarim. So it just kind of opens up your mind to really think about the variety we have in Israeli books. We have 8,500 books that come out, and they're not all novels. Quite the opposite. There are also children's books, there are teen books, there are biographies, there are history books, there are religious books. We have a full, library that's in a whole language that we're not always exposed to as Americans, or people who are here are not always exposed to, in my opinion. Which takes me to what is now popular in the US from what I have basically been seeing. I wanted to point out one more thing, is that actually this is very interesting. There's an article that came out in 2019 that was saying that there's a new trend of erotic books in Hebrew among a variety of women. So I can say, somebody who's worked in a bookstore, it was super interesting to see always who are the people who are buying like the what we called it romantic books, romanim romantim, but it's basically erotic novels. And this is beyond the 50 Shades of Grey that became really popular. There's a lot of different books in this genre, and you see Israeli authors actually growing and writing more about this topic, or in this genre. And it's actually super interesting to see how it's developed over time and how it's become more popular. That over 500 books were written in this genre in 2018. So super interesting. And it's also interesting to know that you have, yes, a little bit of men as well, but you have Druze, you have ultra-Orthodox, you have, the regular secular person. And I mean, you really have a wide range of women who are interested in these books. So that's another trend we see as like popular today in Israel. Moving on to the next thing regarding what's popular in the US, I want to point out basically a lot of the names that Jill already mentioned. So we have Amos Oz, A Tale of Love and Darkness. And I think I saw this, I didn't find any kind of research or, official list of the top books translated from Hebrew to English, but I basically opened a million lists and kind of tried to see what is on every list, or what appears multiple times. And this book always appeared, no matter what. Now, if you ask me, it's probably because of the fact that in 2016, this movie came out called A Tale of Love and Darkness, and Natalie Portman directed it and produced it and everything. I don't know if we have enough time for the trailer, and if we do, I'll show it at the end so you guys can get a taste of that as well. But I find it incredibly interesting that it's on all the lists, like this specific book of Amos Oz compared to anything else he wrote. A Horse Walks Into a Bar was also written relatively recently, and as Jill said, it won awards as well. So that's also a lot of lists. But on Goodreads, the most Israeli book read is all of Yuval Noah Harari's books. He wrote *Sapiens*. He wrote *Homo Deus*. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong as well, but about the future of mankind. And then this is the most recent one, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. So this is popular now, but it was written in Hebrew originally in 2018. So those are the ones that are most read at the moment. And Yuval Noah Harari also was interviewed by Natalie Portman, interestingly enough. And he's become this popular person who is interviewed, and his books are originally in Hebrew, but were translated in English, and it's definitely become one of the popular ones. Now, another trend that I wanted to point out, which is why I put 3 additional books here as well. And I also know that Jill's completely correct. Yehuda Amichai is known, and Aleph Bet Yoshua, so you call him A.B. Yoshua, it's just Aleph Bet, that's how we say it in Hebrew as well. Meir Shalev, there's Edgar Keret as well. A lot of his books are translated. Don't know if these names, ring a bell to you somewhat. And what I found personally, and I think Jill pointed that out as well, is a lot of these authors are politically active and vocal in their opinions. I'm not saying that that's the reason why they're more known, but they definitely are more controversial, and their opinions are leading more to the left. They're more critical towards Israel. And then I don't know what the reason is that they're the ones that are more known, but I think it makes it more interesting and fascinating. And the subject that is of most interest often regarding to Israel, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, comes across in a lot of these books and by a lot of these people personally. Yuval Noah Harari is also somebody who's more outspoken in his personal views, whether it is his own fact that he is gay and he's part of the LGBTQ community, and how that relates to Israel, and his own personal beliefs as well that are political too. But all that comes across in these authors. And just want to point out a few more that also kind of highlight that I saw in a few lists, but highlight that tension and conflict as well. So Chilbet Chizeh is by Samech Yizhar, and I think it was written in 1949, if I'm not mistaken, and it's about the Palestinian expulsions that took place during the Independence War. So that's what the book is about. And The Hilltop came out more recently in 2015, and that is about a post in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria or the territories, whatever terminology you prefer. And it's talking about the complexity of having an outpost that is not recognized by Israel. What does it mean to live there and have the IDF around you and protecting you? And this last one, which is called Dancing Arabs, which is by Sayed Kashua, who's an Israeli Arab author, is talking about a Palestinian who is accepted into an elite school and an elite Jewish school, and goes to that school, and what does he have to do when he's going through from the Palestinian territories to Israel? How does he have to hide his identity? It's called Dancing Arabs because he has to kind of like hide his identity that he is Palestinian, but he's also Arab, and how does he also mingle with the Jews at the same time? So it's really talking about that complexity of identities and complexity of a situation we have in Israel and highlighting that. And I think that that's something common that we can see when looking at the books that are popular in the US. Even though the books that I pointed out here also talk about something that's more complicated, about an Iraqi Jew or somebody on the kibbutz, there's something more obvious about the conflict with these books. Now, there's something more, if you're talking about a West Bank outpost that's way more direct on the subject rather than talking about the kibbutz and the classic Israeli tension that he's experiencing. So that is something that I found quite interesting myself in doing this research, that I noticed that the classic Israeli books that maybe I grew up with and that I talk about with friends is not the same classic that maybe Americans recognize. And it was interesting for me to do that comparison. So I do see that we have a little bit of time. So I will show the trailer. I see that there's 2 comments in the chat. Okay. So I will show the trailer first, and then we will open to questions. So feel free to write in the chat your questions. And also, before, I see some people already left, unfortunately, but I have a few handouts that Jill prepared. And if people are interested in receiving those about the different authors, I would appreciate if, I have most of yours, but I don't know if I have Eugene or Willie's email. So if you're interested, feel free to write your email in the chat, in that case, either privately to me or to everyone. So in the meantime, I'm going to share because I don't know when people are going to leave, and I want to make sure I just put that out there. And here, I'll open this in the meantime. And Jill, how long was the video that you wanted to show? You're muted. Wait, Jill, you're muted. Jill, you're muted.
It's about 3 minutes, but I'm not worried if we don't show it. But I do want to say one thing. Susan asked about you sending the list of books that you just spoke about.
Yeah.
And the ones that you just mentioned, I can't see one of them clearly who the author was, but we do have the others. The Horse Walks into the Bar, The Hilltop. We have those at the library. So just to let
all
Susan,
of these here, all these ones.
I can't read them. What is the one by S.Y. Agnon? Which one is that?
This one is Dancing Arabs. This is Said Kashua. This is The Hilltop, and this is Chilbet Chizeh, which is of Essis Hag.
I think we may have that one. We do have The Hilltop. I
will put in the email though the list of all the different books.
Right.
Then Jill can comment and say what we have in our library as well. So I'll add these 2 that I mentioned too, that they do exist in English as well.
And if they request your handout, they can learn how to search themselves.
Yes, exactly. And next week, I'll just note, because I know Susan was asking, what will be next week is there'll be a panel of shlichim, and we're recommending our favorite books, and I made sure that the majority of them have been translated, and also a lot of them are, or a good portion of them are also in the library as well. And I purposely asked Jill, and I'm going to mention that as well next week. So I'll just show the trailer really quickly because I think it's super interesting, and then we'll open for questions. Great. You can read the book and watch the movie. That's what I do. I always make myself read the book first and then watch the movie.
המדינה שלנו כבר ממש עומדת בשער.
היא לא עומדת. אין שום שער. יש תהום.
אמא, את בסדר?
בוא נמציא לך ציפור.
מה זה קבלים?
קבליר זה אביר. היום אתה תהיה הקבליר שלי. אחרי שתחיה חיים שלמים ותתנסה בכל מיני ניסיונות. התמימות הזאת לא תתקלף לך אף פעם.
I'll just say that I saw this movie in the movie theater and I really didn't like it, but that's just me. Okay. So I was asked what kind of movie this is. So it's a movie based on it's a drama, basically. It's based on the book, and it's a drama about what Israel's foundation. Yeah, and Tybal is correct. It's based on his memoir. Tybal, do you want to mention about the fact that Syed Kashur now lives in the States?
Oh, actually, because that's such a complicated thing with some of the dynamic that's gone back and forth in writers. I'm actually more interested in your comment because I don't think as of Yuval Noah Harari, I think of him now as more an American writer than anything else, or an international. So I was really taken aback to see, obviously I know he's Israeli. I just thought that was very interesting that you had him on the Israeli list.
His books are originally written in Hebrew. He's a professor at Hebrew University. I actually purposely did not take his class, even though I had the option as somebody who majored in history. He's very proud of the fact that he teaches at Hebrew University, even though he really is international. But yeah.
I thought he wrote in English though. No, he writes in Hebrew?
The books are originally in Hebrew. So Sapiens was originally Kitzur Toldot HaEnoshut.
Huh.
Yeah. So from what I know, they're originally written in Hebrew. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know the first one was definitely originally written in Hebrew. So I just see people are leaving right now, and I'd be happy to take questions, but I see that we had new people this time, which I'm really happy about. So I just want to share before we continue the discussion that about the Life Online project. I shared the information in the chat. Our weekly email, which goes out on Fridays. Life Online is a project that I do with other shlichim in the community. So if you're interested in other things like this that are about history, philosophy, cooking, dancing, a lot of different things that we are passionate about, then the weekly email comes out on Friday, and you can click on that link, and our Facebook group is there as well. So I just wanted to share that to people who have not been here before or haven't seen this is the first time I'm seeing them. So you're welcome to join those two things.
Yes, and I would like to make a plug if I could also,
Yeah.
because it came out in, I think, last week's email, but B'nai Israel is participating in helping the Jewish National Fund sponsor these tours to Israel. And what's happening is that the tour guides are not making any money in Israel. So the Jewish National Fund has paired with them, and you can go on a tour of Israel with them. B'nai Israel has joined in and sponsored one. I don't know if you call it sponsored, but we are signed up for one starting next week. So if anyone's interested, go on the B'nai Israel website. There's information there. And you from 4 to 5, you go on a tour with a tour guide, learning history and all that. And then you have a 1-hour break. And then from 6 to 7, they do something with Israeli food. And I'm not sure what yet. It's $50 per family at one computer. And I highly recommend it to help out Israel and the economy.
Thank you, Jill. I like that. So that's basically it for today, and I'm happy to take questions that you have. And Taibo, I'm actually interested now. I'm going to check if the other books were originally written in Hebrew or not, or maybe you already checked. I don't know. But from my best knowledge,
you're right. You're right about Sapiens.
Okay.
You're so right. And I guess I don't know why, because I thought, because doesn't he have a DPhil from Oxford? So clearly, when he was in Oxford, he had to write his dissertation in English.
Yeah. He's become definitely international and more known for sure. But he started out, in Israel. And I find it interesting that he still teaches at Hebrew University when he could just move and, be a professor somewhere else, worldwide. And yeah. And it's interesting because he's very much in Israel. He very much talks about Israel. Yeah, that's from my experience, or from, yeah.